I have very few bad stories anyway.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of my...
Who do you think you are? Well, I can tell you who I am. I'm one of hundreds of people in Australia's film and television post-production community.
I'm dedicated to the pursuit of excellence.
I do my best work in dark rooms, although they're not that dark anymore. I go to seminars and network with like-minded people.
I discuss the nature of the industry and my work through online forums.
I find jobs online with the Edit Search bulletin board.
I work on short films,
documentaries,
television shows, on television drama,
animated feature films,
on feature film drama,
television commercials,
film trailers, on education.
Anything else that gets me out of bed.
I mentor and encourage new talent.
I enter awards where my work is judged by my peers.
I get to mix and match with people who are just like me.
So who am I? I'm an Australian screen editor.
So how great is that trailer for the Australian Screen Editors?
Yeah, it's
wonderful.
I love
it. Welcome to our viewers around the world. My name's Karen Pearlman, and I've come into the Videocraft Broadcast Brains studio here today to interview one of the members of the Australian Screen Editors Guild, Danielle Boesenburg. Hello,
Hi.
Danielle.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. It's really lovely to see you.
You too.
Danielle was recommended to me as a person to interview because she is a lovely person and a working editor and really carving a career for herself in our unique landscape of what it means to be a freelance editor. So I thought I'd start our interview today by asking you about that, Danielle. Tell us about your work. What do you work on? How do you find work? What work are you doing?
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question, and it's the life of a freelance editor, and it's true of any person who works, I think, on a project-by-project basis, is very unpredictable. And I'm starting to really come to love the waves of freelance work, where I finish a film, I lock something off, and send that little baby on into sound post-production and so on, and then have an inevitable kind of a kind of decompression, and then I start fretting about whether the phone will ring again, and I feel I'm unemployed, what am I going to do? And then the phone rings, and then something always comes up. And I think what's happening more and more now is moving beyond that to managing multiple projects at any one time, which is fantastic. It's lovely to be busy, but having overlapping projects and kind of trying to stay on top of where they all need to be at any given time.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing. And so are you following in your work a fairly consistent pathway of getting rushes while things are still being shot, or do rushes come in when they're finished being shot?
Generally speaking, I'm given rushes after they're shot. The last few projects I've worked on have been shot not in Sydney, and they've been low budget. There's been no budget for having an editor on set, so I'm waiting until everything comes back and getting it all in one go and having a few days to get it prepped and so on, then watching through rushes with the director and assembling, and then going on from there.
So that still has meaning for you. Assembly, rough cut, fine cut, those stages are still meaningful for you. I find a lot of young editors now don't really get that. They jump right in and start going for fine cut.
Right. Look, I really like that process. I think it's really important to let things develop. And I think the difference between script and screen is really important. And to see that things that can work on the page don't always work on screen, and other things that you aren't sure about at script level can really sing on the screen. I think it's all about cutting an assembly together where you're looking at the entire scope of the film, and then working out what's working and starting to carve into that and make a really succinct film at the end.
So that's a good bit of advice for young editors right there, because I mean, a lot of my students, for example, will jump right in and go for fine cut, get very attached to, oh, that was a perfect edit, but is that the best take? Do you even need that story point? Right. So that idea of giving a whole assembly, letting it breathe as it was written.
That's right.
And then do you have a conversation with directors about where we at?
Absolutely. I think that in every case, the best productions I've been involved in have a very open and clear communication between the director and the editor, and often the producers and sometimes the DOP as well, where, the best idea wins. It doesn't matter where it came from. We're all trying to serve the story and make the best possible film we can make. And there's no place for ego there. There's no place for attachment to a particular cut. I mean, we've all done that, right? Got attached to a particular sequence and the beauty of the rhythm of that, and then realized that actually we don't need any of it. And, it's a hard lesson, but I think it's an important one.
It is a hard lesson. I mean, it's interesting that you sometimes involve cinematographers in that conversation. Are they there to learn for the next job, or?
Look, I think it's more just about understanding the cinematographer's intention with certain scenes. Obviously, things change between set and post-production, and you can't always maintain the cinematographer's intention. If the story's leading us down another path, we have to follow that. Right. But I think it certainly pays for all of the heads of department to be respectful of one another and understand each other's intentions and keep all of that in mind when constructing story. And again, it all comes down to story.
It all comes down to that project, that you work for the film, not for the director, not for the producer.
We all work for the film.
All work for the
film.
That's a lovely quality. And that's that sort of diplomacy that we all learn about, but it's really how to put it into action.
That's right.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So then you go through assembly, and rough cut then is a series of decisions that you're making about what the structure might really be as opposed to what it was in the script.
That's right. So often, I pre-warn most of the directors I work with for the first time about what I call assembly depression. That is, the director comes in, we've seen the rushes, we love certain shots, they're starting to get an inkling of what they have and what they maybe didn't get. But it's not until they see the assembly that they really start grieving for, shifting from what might be to what is. Right. And I think often that follows a little bit of a dark period for directors where they're kind of kicking themselves as they walk out the door.
That's such a nice phrase, assembly depression. I love this.
And then I think what happens is generally, the director comes back in and we sit down and it's all about, okay, well, what is working? Let's look at what is working. And you start I guess it's a bit like a sculpture, you start with a great big slab of marble and you look at it and think, oh God, there's so much work to do. But once you start carving off the edges, the form becomes clear and you just kind of follow that. And that's what I would call the rough cut. Generally, that's the way I like to approach a rough cut. It's just really firming up the form, the structure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've been working with some cognitive psychologists in my research, right?
Yes.
And we're working on this theory. It's called distributed cognition. And the idea of this theory is that it's not all the thinking is taking place in your brain. Some of the thinking is taking place from the material. And what I've said to these people who don't know anything about editing is that editing's a really good example of this, because what editors will say is that the material is talking to them, or the material is telling them what to do.
Yes.
Is that the experience you're having with this piece of marble?
Absolutely, and I think the proof of that for me is that I get to a point, the best moments in editing for me are when my body is responding. It's actually not in my brain at all, but my body is responding to something and I'm feeling something, and then I know we're on the right path. So I would absolutely say that's true, that it's not all about the thinking, it's about the feeling.
So just to underline that a little bit, there's a a theory of neurology called embodied simulation theory.
Right.
And that's what you're experiencing, according to these neurologists.
Right.
You're physically responding to the movement in the rushes, and you're letting it tell you what it wants a little bit rather than imposing. And I guess that's to do with, that's an interesting point for the directors as well, and that, you know, some of their assembly depression will come from this, what they hoped would be there, and then they get into the edit suite and they realize they too are having a really different response than they expected to have.
That's right.
So,
and I tend to think, I know that this is, every editor has a different feeling about this, but my feeling is usually that it's better for the editor not to be on set, because it doesn't matter what happened. For me, it doesn't matter what happened on set, and I don't want to know how hard it was to get that scene. I don't want to know about, the work that the director had to do with that actor to get that performance. All that matters to me is what we have.
Right.
So,
and that's all that matters to an audience.
That's
too,
right. That's right.
So
and the other thing, I think the audience will never know what you don't tell them.
Right.
So they don't need to know any of that as well. They will only know what you present.
Right.
And as long as you're, again, serving the story and giving them the very best moments within what you have to serve that story, that's what they know.
That's what they know.
Yeah.
All right. So you get through this from this completely shapeless slab of marble.
Yes.
And you pull bits away, and a shape starts to emerge, and then we get through the depression, and we realize, oh, this shape could have life in it.
Yes.
And then we move from, we call that a rough cut, and then we move to fine cut. And is that the fun part for you?
Yeah, look, I think they can all be fun.
Yes.
I think they can all be fun. I think at any point in the process, once you put a couple of shots together and they start to work and you get a glimpse of that magic, that's my favorite part of any part of the process.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, I think fine cutting is really fun when you're just looking at, okay, well, we know we want that there, but is that the best moment of performance? And reviewing performance takes and seeing, other things that maybe now in the context of this piece that you've shaped perhaps have more meaning. So it's, even though it's really important to watch the rushes with an open mind at the very beginning of the process, I think it's good to review them at the end of the process too, because again, intentions change during the course of the edit.
And you find that you've built up a rhythm or a structure that really asks for something different at a given moment.
And I think too, at fine cut is the time when you're really focusing on those rhythms and where to give time and where to speed through stuff and letting performances breathe. And I think it's very hard to get to that point until you've cleared away the bits of slab that you don't need.
Yes. So people often compare editing to sculpture, and they make two different metaphors. One is that it's a piece of marble and you take stuff away.
Yeah.
And the other is that it's a piece of clay and you add stuff to it.
Right.
But maybe what you're saying is that the assembly is about taking bits away.
Yes.
And the fine cut might be, you might be putting some things in differently or something.
I think so.
Yeah. You can't repair marble. You need to...
That's
it
right.
needs to have a little bit more breath than marble at that fine cut stage. Nice.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous. And then you're handing on to sound post. So you're not doing sound editing, titles, finishing, grading, any of that?
I sometimes do titles. It depends on the project, depends on the director's relationships with other people that they've worked with in the past. Usually I will put temp music in the edit, and we will source some sound effects and things where we need it, do a little bit of sound design just to sell the cut.
Yes.
But generally then, I hand over to a sound designer and often a composer.
I mean, that's quite a contentious point, really, the point about temp music. And I mean, I always tell my students, don't cut with music. It'll make you think the cut is working.
Yes,
but then
absolutely.
This time when you're screening it for a producer, well, you might need to pop some music in there. So are you consulting with composers when possible about what music to pop in there? Or?
Yes, and often, so I'm working, sort of towards the end of two projects at the moment, and on one of them the composer is providing the temp music. And it's a constant conversation between the director and the composer. So we've put some temp in, and then the composer can see the music with the images, and they've made changes. And so those music tracks have been changing and updating during the course of the cut. So by the time we lock off, the composer will know what final flourishes are needed.
Yeah.
But that's been a really great conversation.
That is really ideal.
Yeah,
isn't
really,
it
is ideal.
And that's something. So having the composer work through cuts with you, and I guess at that point they're not getting too married to specific timing or cues. They're
That's
giving
right.
you instrumentation,
Yes.
maybe melody, things like that.
That's
and
right.
And
tone,
your
that kind
tone
of thing.
And that kind of
yeah.
thing.
And I absolutely agree. You know, I will almost always, at some point in the fine cut process, mute all the music and watch the cut. I think it's really important. You've got to know that it works.
Right, because it can just smooth over those cuts.
Yeah,
and then you
that's
think,
right.
Oh, that
Everything
works
looks
great.
good with
Wait a
music.
minute.
I mean, it's so powerful. It's wonderful.
It is wonderfully powerful. So this working sort of iteratively with the composer, if you will, and I've had sound designers recently say that to me as well. They'll say, we can follow the cut. You can give it to us and then make changes.
Yeah.
This is really technology allowing us some
Absolutely.
new affordances,
Yes.
isn't it? Are you finding changes to technology are exciting or helpful to you, or are they daunting and you wish they'd stop?
Look, it's a little of both.
Right.
I was introduced to editing. In school, my loves were drama and photography. I didn't know about filmmaking yet, but I was performing and I was taking and developing my own photographs. I had a little darkroom set up in my parents' cellar. And, you know, it wasn't until I got to uni that I realized that these two things could combine. And that, you know, there was this amazing thing called editing. And I learnt, fortunately, on Steenbeck. So I was cutting film, celluloid, splicing, and I think that was fantastic, and I'm so grateful for having that experience. Right. But I came into it at a time when things were moving into the digital realm.
Yeah.
So very quickly, I moved from film to start with, my first job as an editor, I was using a Betacam tape-to-tape machine. Right. So linear editing, awful, right? Awful. I mean, now
that
it's
was
just
the
awful.
dark days of
I know,
editing,
I shudder
wasn't it?
to think about it.
Even actual film was better than those tape-to-tape things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reviewing it, I mean, nightmare. I'm so glad we've moved past that. So then straight away, Avid was being developed and being released, but it was, you know, prohibitively expensive. It was, you know, really in its very, very early days. And there was this other thing called Media 100, which was another digital platform.
I remember that.
Yeah,
Media 100.
so I did a
that.
Media 100 course at Metro Screen,
right,
and used that to get a job in advertising, where they happened to have Media 100 systems set up. So I was in the TV department of this ad agency, cutting on Media 100. Then I went to film school to AFTRS to do a short course in Avid, learned Avid. From there, when I was at AFTRS full-time doing a graduate diploma, I learned Final Cut for the first time. And since then, I've also taken on Premiere Pro. Right. And of course, during this time also, camera technology has been evolving. Right. So I feel as though adapting to change has been a necessity since day one for me, because I've seen so many different developments over the course of the last 20 years. And it's interesting because prior to that, you know, cinema and celluloid had this long, you know, it was just, that's all you knew.
Yeah.
So, you know, adapting has been a part of my career from the beginning, and I feel very comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's great.
Although I would say more recently, because digital technology has become so affordable and so accessible, I worry about it devaluing the role of the editor, because a lot of people can own the software and can make their way around it.
Right.
And it means that less and less, with some directors, less and less we're part of the conversation.
Right.
You know, they're able to do things for themselves, and they think that that's editing, and so, you know, I think that's one of the negative.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I mean, so it's part of your training and consciousness as an editor to be sort of platform agnostic. It's like, this is a tool and I can adapt to learning it, and that's really important.
By necessity,
And I remember when I was at film school, an Avid cost $70,000.
Yes,
right?
Yes, that's right.
So you know, this was a thing you could do when you got out of film school, was drive this $70,000 machine.
That's right.
No more is that the case.
That's right.
So it becomes really important to be able to say what it is that an editor's actual contributions are. Their skill, their special skills are not just about software. They have other things in their sensibility. Now,
absolutely.
I have some ideas about what these things are, but I'd be very interested in your ideas too. Like, what do you think makes a good editor? What's important about what an editor brings?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think overall, I think the technology is fantastic, but I see the technology as a tool for the creativity.
Right.
So it's there, it's important, we need to stay on top of it, but actually it's the tool, it's not the product.
Right.
And I think what an editor brings is their eye, their perspective, their interpretation of the rushes, and I think in almost all cases, two heads in that room, having a director and an editor working together on something and brainstorming ideas, and then the best idea winning is, absolutely
it's the process.
the model.
So, so when the director becomes their own editor because they know how to use the software, you're losing one of those brains, essentially.
Absolutely.
Brains and bodies.
That's right, and sometimes we all know what it's like to be too close to the material and to not be able to step back and see something other in there, and I think that's one of the benefits of the two working together in a really creative collaboration.
And there's something you touched on earlier about the way that directors have to go through a process, and the editor is almost their guide through that assembly depression and through that realization of what the material could be. Do you think that there are times when you are the better respondent to the material than the director, that the director is still thinking about what they generated or what they wanted to generate rather than...
I think definitely in the early stages, and then I think it switches through the process. And so I feel like at the very beginning, I'm certainly more objective than the director at the very beginning, but I think by and large, during the collaboration, the director comes to see exactly what they have, and in the best instances can let go of. It's quite a beautiful period in the process to see the point when the director lets go of what they thought they had or what they hoped they had and embraces what they do have and then rises to that and makes the best possible.
So that's one of the things that an editor is good at, and it's not really explicitly taught, and it's certainly not in the software, but an editor needs to be good at that kind of guiding process.
Absolutely.
Allowing the space for the director to see what could be, making offers that the director can be happy about responding to, and
that's
so
right.
forth.
And it is about making offers. It's about, hey, look at this little gem we've got here. What can we do with that?
Right? So what is the skill then that makes you able to make a good offer? I know that's hard to answer. So
it's very hard to answer. I guess, you hear editors say this all the time, and it's very, I feel sorry for people who are looking for something more because it's very hard to quantify, but it really is instinct. I think it's about, that thing I said before about letting your body respond and kind of getting the brain out of the way, kind of not worrying about what the brain's saying because the brain will often put up the challenges, but what about this, but what about this? Just letting your body respond. Well, I just love something about that moment is feeling authentic. It's feeling great. Right. Let's use that.
So in my research, I've done a lot of research on intuition and trying to figure out, well, what do we mean when we say it's intuitive? And one of the things that I've come up with is the idea that we can't teach talent, but we can train it.
Right.
And the way to train it is by training the editor's sensitivity so that they're more alert to, more sensitive to what that material, how it's affecting them as a body. And then, of course, we also train the editor's knowledge of story so that they have a sense of how their feeling about material will become coherent.
Yes.
And then we're training them to also be quite alert to how an audience, that they are an audience. So they're both a craftsperson and an audience, and they're moving back and forth between these two positions in relation to the material.
Yeah.
Do you think any of that came through for you in your training in film school, for example? Would you say film school was a good idea in helping you to train your sensitivity?
Yes. Absolutely. I think one of the greatest gifts that film school gave me was confidence to interpret feedback, which I think is another very tricky part of the editing process. I remember distinctly putting an edit up in the theatre and having 30 people watching it and hearing some feedback, and remember particularly someone giving feedback about a scene and saying something about that scene doesn't feel right. And so we went back to the edit suite, and the director and I looked at each other and we said, actually, I don't think it's that scene. I think it's the scene before.
Right.
And, you know, we were just kind of speculating what it was that might have caused this issue.
Right.
And we changed the scene before.
Right.
And when we screened it again, the same person said, I love how you fixed that scene.
Oh,
and we didn't touch that scene. But I think it's that was one of the very great things that came out of film school.
Yeah.
Just being open to learning about feedback and listening to people and really, really listening, not just, you know, taking the notes and going, right, yes, we must do that.
Right, right.
Better not I mean, what if we changed the scene in question instead? I don't know whether we would have achieved the same outcome, you know, who knows?
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that was great.
Learning,
And the other, and obviously meeting people, meeting collaborators, future collaborators, and good friends. I have a lot of friends from my time at film school.
Right.
And the other thing actually was the benefits of a lot of your classes actually, talking about editing, but not in terms of editing, talking about energy. Where is energy with a look? What are we doing physically? Where are we? What is happening emotionally here? Which was something that, so look, learning about editing, but outside the edit suite, you know, which I think is really valuable as well.
That is valuable. Yeah, that's great. So learning to hear feedback and not necessarily just fix the thing that that person suggests, but to hear it and say, okay, well, here's an interesting thing. How do we work with this? And so that questioning process, in a way, sensitizing yourself to feedback as well. And of course, meeting people who you're still working with, many of the people that you met at film school, and some of your more interesting projects come from that.
That's right. Yeah, a couple of directors that I work with still all this time later, which is wonderful. And the editing group, you know, the bunch of editors, we're friends, we stay in touch, we send each other cuts to review.
Right.
You know, it's lovely to have that sense of community.
And are all of your friends members of the Australian Screen Editors Guild?
They are not all members. Some of them are living overseas now, so I think it's a little bit harder for them. Some are, but yes, not all. We need more of them.
We need more of them. Well, I mean, I'm a big supporter of the Australian Screen Editors Guild, a former president, long-time committee member, and you're on the committee now for the Screen Editors Guild. Is that right?
That's right. Okay. Last year, the ASE put on a training workshop through TAFE, where Monica Davidson tailored a course specifically for the business of editing, small business, and with an editing focus. And I went along to the first session and looked around and saw all of these amazing people and thought, why do we spend all of our time sitting in these dark rooms when we've got this great community of people who are supportive, they're sympathetic, they absolutely understand what we're going through at any given time. And that inspired me to get more involved and step out of my little box and engage more. And it was a wonderful course that the ASE put on, and you know, I'm really thrilled to be part of the committee now.
All right. Well, I think we're running out of time here, so I'll just end it there with a little plug for the Australian Screen Editors Guild at screeneditors.com. And for those of you who are still students who might be listening to this, keep in mind that for students, membership of the Guild is free. You should definitely join. It's a great community of people, as Danielle says, and it's where all of this great storehouse of knowledge and ideas is living for editors. So
that's right.
Join the Guild.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Videocraft, for this opportunity, and great to talk with you, Danielle.
Thanks, Karen,
thank you so much.
And thank you to the ASE and to Videocraft for having us.
So who do you think you are? Well, I can tell you who I am. I'm one of hundreds of people in Australia's film and television
post-production community.
I'm dedicated to the pursuit of excellence.
I do my best work in dark rooms, although they're not that dark anymore. I go to seminars and network with like-minded people.
I discuss the nature of the industry and my work through online forums.
I find jobs online with the Edit Search bulletin board.
I work on short films,
documentaries,
television shows, on television drama,
animated feature films,
on feature film drama,
television commercials,
film trailers, on education,
Anything else that gets me out of bed.
I mentor and encourage new talent.
I enter awards where my work is judged by my peers.
I get to mix and match with people
who are just like me. So who am I? I'm an Australian screen editor.